Hello, you're watching Broadcasting Scotland and I'm Michelle Rodger. I'm here today with Jeane Freeman, political analyst, business owner, co-founder of Women for Independence and the SNP candidate for Carrick, Cumnock and Doon Valley. Jeane toured the country during the referendum. I'm sure you saw her on your television screens, not least of all in that now infamous interview with Andrew Neil on the Daily Politics show, more of which later. Jeane, you've had a varied career over the years in politics and in business. You had your own business consultancy and you've been involved in lots of public positions as well, like the Royal Jubilee Hospital and so on. But through everything that you've done, there's a really strong sense, common thread of justice, social justice, justice for all. Where does that come from?
That's interesting. I think probably my dad. My dad was a strong trade unionist. It was my dad that talked to me about coming back from the war when he was in the RAF and the almost the social contract that was made between government and people after the war, and the determination by he was a son of a immigrant family and minor stock, all of that. And the determination that the end of the Second World War for the men and women coming back would not be the same as the end of the First World War. So he used to talk to me about all of that, and he had a really strong sense of your responsibility to work hard and care for your own family, but to be fair, and that everything should be fair. Mm. And so it wasn't right that some people had more than others when the ones who had less were as deserving as the ones who had, and all of that. That was a big, strong influence all through my childhood, and it primarily was my dad.
You're standing in Carrick, Cumnock and Doon Valley, and you grew up in South Ayrshire. What was it like growing up in South Ayrshire all those years ago, and compared to where South Ayrshire is today? What are the challenges? Are they the same or are they different?
In lots of ways it's not that different. The constituency I'm standing in is a bit of East Ayrshire and a bit of South Ayrshire. So a large part of it is old mining communities, and obviously they were living communities in the sense that the pits were working in those days. There was a big fishing industry out of Ayr Harbour, and I used to go there with my Uncle Matt to the auction, and he would always buy fish, and there was only us, but he would come home with crates of fish just because he liked bidding in auctions. So there was a big fishing industry in Ayr and down in Girvan. There were the pits that were working, and there was quite a lot of other industrial. There was a carpet factory at Templeton's and so on and so forth. All of that has changed, of course, since then. But what remains the case, I think, and it's not to romanticise it, what remains the case is quite a strong sense still of community, particularly in the small towns and the villages, a very strong sense of their own history, and a feeling that I hope, working with folk down there, that Ayrshire gets a bit forgotten. It is a very rural community, but what we tend to do is think about the rural communities in Scotland as being the Highlands and the Islands, when of course there are large parts of our country where the same challenges are in front of people. So those challenges are about transport infrastructure, connectivity in terms of broadband and 3G, never mind 4G, the ability of people to get to and from their work easily, and then if you can fix the transport infrastructure and the connectivity infrastructure, then you open that area up to new homes, to people wanting to live. It's a very beautiful part of the country, and to business, and those remain the challenges. So they're not that dissimilar to what was there before, but the whole idea of economic growth is a big deal for that constituency.
As well as a varied career in business, you've had a varied political career too, having been a member of a couple of different political parties. What is it over the years that has influenced you and changed your politics to where you stand now?
I think that I don't think my values have changed at all. And I think I learned very early on that political parties are the construct of us as people to reflect our values. And for me, at the end of the day, the loyalty I owe most is to being able to sleep at night, knowing that what I've been doing every day hasn't compromised those values. So if I'm in a political party, as I was in the Labour Party, where that party takes a series of decisions that utterly, for me, compromise the values I believe in, then I don't actually owe any loyalty to that party. I owe loyalty to those values, to my dad and to all the folk that they came from. And that is why my party allegiance has changed. But the thread that runs through that is still that strong commitment to social justice and to fairness and to opportunity. You know, I grew up in a working class family, and if it hadn't been for how hard my mum and dad worked and their encouragement, I wouldn't be where I am now. I wouldn't have stayed on at school. I wouldn't have had the chance, even after I trained as a nurse, to go back to university. And those chances get denied our young people increasingly. And Labour started that. I don't expect the Tories to give young people chances, but I do expect Labour to do it. When they stopped doing it, that was enough.
You were in Holyrood in the formative years working with the then First Minister Jack McConnell. What was it like to be a part of something like that, creating policies, processes and procedures?
Yeah, it was a hugely privileged position. I had campaigned for a Scottish Parliament. It was great to be inside then, something that you believed in. Initially, it was intriguing how decisions get made and politics works, if you like, at that level. Increasingly, it became frustrating, though, because it felt to me that we were increasingly stymied by two things. First of all, that it was a Labour-Lib Dem coalition with a UK Labour government, and so the eye was always down south to make sure that we weren't upsetting anybody in Westminster. And that I found difficult, especially when it sometimes meant, in my eyes, that we didn't do the right thing. And the Dungavel and the detention of children in Dungavel, for me, was a classic example of how we could have used the powers, limited though they were, that Scotland had, to go down a different road, and chose not to, because that would upset Labour at Westminster. So it was exciting, it was highly pressurised, but it's a huge privilege to be at that level in government and able to help make things happen, help to influence the way things work, see politicians up close with all their great points and their foibles, and increasingly, though, frustrating, because we could have done more.
I'd like to talk to you about Women for Independence, of which you are a co-founder. What was it that inspired you and your fellow co-founders to start and build such a movement?
I think we all shared, there was about 5 of us who actually didn't know each other very well, but were in touch with each other through things like social media, and knew there was going to be a referendum. Each of us is a feminist. We knew that it was unlikely that women would be much represented in terms of the media's debate, and we're winding ourselves up to be cross about that. When, I can't remember who first said, why don't we stop being angry about it and try and do something about it? And that was how Women for Independence was born. We were initially cross at the idea of the media telling us what women thought. So we decided our very first piece of activity, if you like, was the listening exercise, which was basically in in small groups and larger groups, going around the country, gathering groups of women together, initially through almost a network of friends and colleagues who were interested, and starting with the question of, what do you think about an independent Scotland? What excites you about it? What worries you about it? What are you thinking? And from that, it grew. So we were able, early doors, to challenge some of the media's perceptions and say, well, actually, we've talked to X number of women, and that isn't what they think. Here's what bothered them. So that also allowed us to challenge the idea that the only thing that women were interested in was childcare and the health service. When we were coming across women with really serious points to make about the economy, about defence, about international relations. So we're able to challenge this notion that we don't trouble our pretty little heads with these big, difficult questions, and we're just worried about what happens to the Wains. We're perfectly capable of worrying about all of that.
Women for Independence has been responsible for influencing thinking around women in the justice system in particular. Can you tell us about that Justice Watch campaign, what it's achieved and what you hope it will continue to achieve?
That campaign, there are, one of the really noticeable things I think about Women for Indy is the degree of talent and experience that is in all those members. And women who've never been involved in anything like this before and got involved in the referendum and have stayed active and involved. And amongst that, there are a group of women who have a direct interest and experience of the criminal justice system in Scotland, and became increasingly frustrated by the number of reviews, starting with Henry McLeish in around about 99, a review of women in prison and what we're going to do about it. And every review says more or less the same thing, and that is that the vast majority of women held in Cortonvale prison should not be there. Their issues that have led to their offending are not being tackled. That is precisely the wrong place to help them not re-offend in the future. There are issues about drugs, self-harming, children, the whole gamut. And every single review, one after the other, says the same thing, and nothing happens. So the Angelini review, which went a step further and actually made very practical suggestions about how change could come, and given her background as former Lord Advocate, was very powerful in being able to argue change in the justice system. Then, when nothing seemed to be happening about that, and there was the idea of building a larger women's prison in Inverclyde, and that was somehow a progressive step, then those women inside Women for Indy decided that something needed to be done about that. A bit like the early days of the start. Rather than whinging and moaning, let's do something. Mm-hmm. And from that, the Justice Watch campaign grew, because although, all credit to them, the Scottish Government made the decision not to build that large prison, but to begin to follow the Angelini recommendations, you need to help politicians with ideas and with data, and help them understand the numbers of people who are on their side when they want to make change.
Women for Independence has a number of other campaigns ongoing at the moment as well. Can you tell us a bit about some of them and your ambitions for them?
Sure. One of the important things about Women for Independence is the autonomy of the local groups. So people are part of the organisation by being individual members, and from that they elect the national committee. But the key organisational element, if you like, are the local groups. So each local group decides for itself what its priorities are. So we have some local groups that are involved in running book clubs, education events, meetings about fracking or other issues so women can find out more. But the kind of campaigning work is along the lines of what we call women helping women. So a lot of work around food banks, a lot of campaigns around VAT, removal of VAT from sanitary protection. A lot of Women for Indie members involved in the back to school uniform banks, which will now continue. They were initially just for this, getting kids back after this summer for this first term, but they've been so successful, and of course the women involved recognise that kids grow. Those uniforms, they'll be grown out of some or all of them by the start of next year. They'll need winter coats and warmer shoes and so on. So there is now a network building of Women for Indie and other groups who will continue that work. And the running thread of it is actually the notion that women can take action to effect change, that we can make people's lives different. We can improve things, whether it's just in our own street or whether it's across the whole country. And the Women for Independence groups are frankly utterly inspiring, and they just get on and do it. And they network with each other, and they reach out and involve themselves in other community activity and with other people, and they really do make a huge difference. There are hundreds of kids who went back to school this term not stigmatised because they didn't have the right clothes. They all did, and I think that's brilliant.
Fantastic. We can't not talk about that Andrew Neil interview on Daily Politics. I think the YouTube clips had more than 80,000 views. As a woman who watched it, I was shouting, "Go Jeane, go Jeane." You properly put Andrew Neil in his place when he was clearly wrong, not used to being corrected, I don't think. Talk us through what happened, and you looked very cross.
I was a bit cross, actually. Yes, I was, I have to admit. The premise for the interview was to go on and talk about why more and more Labour supporters were turning towards yes for independence. That was the premise, and that was the basis on which I turned up. So I was initially a little taken aback. I think you can see it in the first answer when he goes straight into TTIP and health and not that. And then I was cross at him doing that and thinking that he can ride roughshod. B, that he clearly thought that he was dealing with a no-mark who wouldn't know anything, and that just made me, that prods the ego. And C, I don't like people who use their position and their microphone to talk over others and to, in effect, be a bully. So all of those three together made me cross at him. Plus, I knew my stuff. I knew about the issue of TTIP, and I also knew at some point, or I had a suspicion at some point, that he was going to do that number that he did, which is, well, if you want to do more, just tax. So I can't say I enjoyed it, but I was still annoyed when it was over. You have no idea when you're doing these things how they're going to be. But I know that Women for Indie's media person was straight on the phone to the producer saying, don't you ever do that again? Because the thing that kept going through my head afterwards was, if we had asked one of the women from Women for Indie, and we use lots of women in the media, if we'd asked one of them who hadn't done media work before to go on and do that, that could have damaged their confidence so much that they would never have done it again. And that made me angry because it was just luck that it was a last minute request by the programme. I was actually in and around the BBC doing something else, so I could go upstairs and do it. And I've done media before, but we were using lots of women who had never done it before, who were doing really well, but that could have destroyed their confidence. And how dare he
Yeah.
do that? How dare he?
Final question, Jeane. Looking forward 5-10 years to Scotland as a country, what do you think Scotland should look like after our new MPs down south, our new MSPs coming in? How would you like Scotland to look?
I'd like it to look like an independent country. I want Scotland to be independent. That wasn't a one-off thing for me. And more, I believe it is absolutely the right decision. I actually think, interestingly, in lots of ways, we are behaving as if we were independent. And I want Scotland to look like an independent country, because it will be one. I want it to look much more participative in how it works with the people who live and work here in terms of political decisions. I want to see politics being done differently in Scotland, in a way that genuinely involves and listens to people, isn't shouty, and has politicians who are willing to say, do you know what, I hadn't thought of that, that's a good point, or we got that wrong, let's see what we can do to fix it. Because that way we rebuild trust in politicians who are but the symbols of a democratic process. That's all politicians are. And the democratic process is absolutely central. I also believe that getting that democratic process right means that we will be a fairer and more just country. And that's exactly what we should be.
Jeane, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this. You've been watching Broadcasting Scotland. If you would like to help us decide who we're going to interview next, please drop us a tweet at Broadcast Scot or speak to us on Facebook. Thank you for watching.